Welcome to Sourdough Baking 101. I'm so glad if you were in the class, here is your replay. And if you missed the class, here is your replay as well. It can be used as a resource as you go into the kitchen to make your very first loaf. We cut out the beginning parts, and so what you're going to see is me in the middle of telling my baking story and the beginning of the replay. We name her Manna. So that's what you got in your PO box or mailbox or whatever. So anyway, I was successful with making my own sourdough starter. So then I made my first loaf of bread, and I tried the artisan loaf. The artisan loaf is like the beautiful pictures that you see on Instagram. It's more of the rounded loaf. You cut it. It has like a lot of holes in it, like what they call an open crumb. I tried that. Now today we're not going to do that. And the reason is because that is way more advanced than what I'm going to show you. Today is all about how to bake from the beginning. And again, I tried that my first time. It was okay. And I have done that several times, and I still am not perfect at it, but I would say I'm probably like a 90. But that is way more advanced. And so today, I'm going to teach you how to do the basics of sourdough. And we're going to make a sandwich loaf, and we're going to make some crackers. Very, very simple, very, very easy. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I think it's important that you have confidence in your kitchen when it comes to sourdough. One of the worst things that will fail you is to think that you can't do it. And I want to tell you, just from my own personal baking story, if I can do it, you can do it. And so as I go through today, I have one goal, and that goal is to make it as simple as possible, so that after this video and you have an active starter, that you will be in your kitchen this week doing one of these recipes, and that you will send me a picture and say, I did it. That is my number one goal. And so however simple I need to make it, however many times I have to answer the question, I don't mind. I want you to get what you came for. I want you to get what you paid for. And so that is what we're going to do today. And that's how I've structured it, to be as simple as possible and to explain why you do certain things. So that way, when you get in your kitchen, it's going to make sense and you're going to have a level of confidence. Now, the very first thing I want to start with are a couple of myths when it comes to sourdough. One, people said it's hard. It's not hard. It is not hard. I'm going to show you simply how to do it. And if you can read and write and follow instructions, you can do it. And I know that all of you can, because you signed up for the class. So I want to go ahead and let you know right now, you are empowered and you can do it. Number two, people think I have to have a 100-year-old starter. You don't. My starter is 3.5 years old, and I'm baking bread every single week, every single day if I want to. So you don't have to have that. So one of the things that we're going to do, before we get going, I want to remind you that, one, you should have in your email the digital guide that I sent you. Now, I printed mine out just for reference for me, because it's going to be easier for me to have it in my hand and go through things with you versus me having it on a computer. But you have the same information in a digital format. That should be in your email. It's 75 pages with everything. You could read this and be on your way to sourdough. So you should have that. Also, you should have gotten a dehydrated sourdough starter. If you pay for the class before Wednesday, then you should already have it in your mail. For those that paid after Wednesday, either it was sent on Thursday or it will be sent tomorrow. So you should have it in no less than 2 days. Okay? If for some reason you ordered before Wednesday of last week and you do not have it, then email me, Barbara@livingfoodsfarm.com, and we will work it out. Okay? So everybody should have those two things. So let's put in the chat. The first question that I want to see is, tell me why you signed up for the class, or what's your experience with baking in general. So let me know if you've baked bread before, you've baked yeast, but never sourdough, or you can't bake anything. Just put in the chat and let me know kind of where you guys are coming from, starting from, and we're going to go from there. Okay, good. You said you're watching with your daughter on the main TV. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So you guys start putting in the chat and just tell me, in your own quick, short words, why you signed up for the class, what you want to learn. Hey, I tried it, didn't work. I've never tried it. I have no experience, but I have always wanted to learn. It seemed like a lot, so I never did it. Perfect. I've baked bread, but it's been hit or miss. Perfect. Got it. We could do that. I bake desserts and single breads using the bench bread maker, but want to expand. Great. I can't bake, I burn. Girl, I got you. No problem. Retired and want to do all the things. Yes. Jackie says I've baked bread before, but need to make sourdough bread. Perfect. I want to be self-sufficient and save money. Yes, yes, yes. I've been baking bread, but it's coming out dense. Okay, perfect. I got you. I got you. We're going to go ahead and kind of get started. So what I'm going to do first is I need to set my timer. So what I've done, I've prepped some things, and we got to get to at a certain point in the class, wherever I am, I'm going to have to stop and move and show you, so that way you can at least see the first two steps visually. So that way when you get in your own kitchen, you know, oh, it is supposed to look like that. So I'm gonna have to set a timer for 2, and I'm on Central Time, for at least by 2:45, I need to be showing you a step. So I'm gonna set the timer for 2:30, which my phone is over here. Let me just grab my phone. Let's just say, so it'll go off. So that way I don't forget. We're gonna make 2 recipes. One is a sourdough sandwich bread loaf. Now, if you've seen the pretty artisan loaves, those are nice. But I'll tell you, practically for me and my family, we eat more sandwich bread than we're going to eat that pretty loaf. The loaf is, I mean, it's good to like slice for French bread, garlic bread, but for just like everyday sandwiches, to me, it's a little bit much. Again, if you want to learn, you can. But today we're going to do a simple sandwich bread because I think that's more useful and universal for most people. That's going to be using active starter. The second recipe we're going to make are sourdough discard crackers. And both of those recipes, I'm using the exact recipe that's in your digital guide. So those are the 2 recipes we're going to make. So one using active starter and one using your discard. So the very first thing we're going to start with right now is, what is the difference between sourdough and yeast bread? Okay. So I think it's important to start with the why so that you know, because it helps me in my mind to understand, okay, what am I working with? So I want you to think about a traditional yeast bread recipe. It could be rolls, it could be donuts, it could be cake, it could be whatever, muffins, bread. When you're doing your recipe, you're going to have some basic ingredients: flour, water, sugar, salt, and then it's going to ask you to get a package of either active dry yeast or instant yeast, right? Hopefully you're following me. To make it very simple, all we're doing in a recipe is that instead of us using the active dry yeast packet that comes a little, a little red and yellow packet, instead of us using that, we're going to replace that with sourdough starter. So what I want you to think about is sourdough starter is your yeast. It is what's going to make your bread rise. So when I say it has to be active, it has to be in a state or condition for it to cause your bread to rise. When we talk about sourdough discard means it is not active, meaning it has no rising, no leavening agent power. But you can still use the sourdough discard for things that don't need to be risen, like crackers, like pancakes, like naan. Does that make sense so far? I want to stop here. Let me know if that makes sense. Say yes, no. Okay, I see some nods of the head. Okay, yes. Okay, perfect. So again, the sourdough starter is replacing the yeast in a recipe. Now, let me be clear. I don't want you to go get a yeast recipe and do everything that the yeast recipe says and substitute the yeast for sourdough starter. That's not what I'm saying. Because if you do that, you have to adjust some of your ratios of flour and water. What I am saying is that the sourdough starter is a leavening, rising agent like yeast is. Okay, so hopefully we all understand that. Now, let's talk about what a sourdough starter is compared to active dry yeast. They both go through what we call a fermentation process, right? So they're exchanging oxygen and all of that. So the difference between sourdough starter and the yeast that you buy in the store, which we'll call commercial yeast, is that the sourdough starter is all natural, okay? You are making it yourself from flour and water, and that flour and water combined goes through a process. So the sourdough starter is a combination of wild yeast and lactic acid that come together and ferment. That is in the most basic and simplest terms. Now, that same process is happening with commercial yeast, except it's a different strand of yeast. And it's not, when I say it's not natural, I'm not saying it's bad for you. It is not a natural process. How can you tell the difference? Because when you make a yeast bread recipe, it's going to rise in 3 to 4 hours. When you do sourdough, it takes longer. Why? Because it's a more natural process. It doesn't mean that one is not good or better. I'm not trying to make a difference. But when it does come to sourdough, it is healthier for you. Your body is able to digest it easier. If you or someone that you live with has what we call a high or a gluten intolerance. Now, if they're gluten-free, I'm not talking about that, but if they have like a gluten intolerance at a certain level, sometimes, most of the times, they can digest sourdough better than they can yeast bread. So it is definitely healthier for you. Are we all good so far? How long does discard last in the fridge? Great question. And we'll have plenty of time at the end to do Q&A. And I'll answer your questions. But to answer this question, sourdough discard in the fridge lasts indefinitely. Now, you want to use it. My preference is I use it within 1 to 2 weeks, but it will last indefinitely. Now, if you don't use it within the 2 weeks, what's going to happen? It's going to be more sour. If you like the sour tanginess taste of sourdough, then that may not bother you. I personally do not like the sour, tangy taste of sourdough. I like the benefits of sourdough, but I don't like that tangy taste. And so the longer you let it ferment, be in the fridge or whatever the case may be when it comes to your discard, you can still use it, but it's going to have more lactic acid and it's going to be more tangy. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so are we all clear so far on what a sourdough starter is? It's nothing but a combination of flour and water that come together that creates a wild yeast bacteria process. I don't know all the technical terms, but then it starts to what we call ferment and it becomes active. Okay, does that make sense? And I have notes here because I didn't do a PowerPoint slide this time. So I'm making sure that I'm just checking the flow of my notes to make sure that we're good. So, and I wrote down the description. Sourdough starter is a living culture. So that's the part I want to make sure I talk about. It is a living culture. Like it's living, right? The more you feed it, the more it's going to grow. So it's a living culture of natural wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria used to make bread rise. When you combine the flour and the water, it allows it to ferment and it turns the sugar into carbonated gas and lactic and acetic acid. That's the whole chemical process behind the scenes. Now, when it comes to yeast, active yeast also turns the sugar into alcohol at a very low volume, and that alcohol evaporates as the dough is baked, and then it turns it into carbonated gas. So if anybody wants to tell you like, okay, they're both going through a fermentation process. It's just the way that they do it. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. Does it really matter about the type of flour? Yes. I think it's pronounced Aaron. Aaron, yes, it does matter about the type of flour, and we're going to talk about that. So first thing I want to show you is sourdough starter. Let me start here. Now, for those of you that received the packet in the mail with your dehydrated starter, has anybody went ahead and activated and you have an active starter? Let me know in the comments if you've started it and have an active starter. If you started it and it didn't look right, if you started it and like, I don't know. Okay, I see a no. Okay. Let me know if anybody has started it at all. Just even let me know if you started it. I started it, but you're on day 2. Okay, fantastic. I also sent you a video of me visually doing the rehydration of sourdough starter. So you have written instructions, but I also did a video and I sent that out, I think on Friday morning or Friday afternoon. So if you don't have that, send me an email, but check your email, check your spam. It's entitled How to Rehydrate Your Starter. So you will actually see me doing it. Okay, Laverne, so you have an active starter. Is that correct? Okay, perfect. Anybody else? That is going to be your first step. After this video, if you have, the very first step is to rehydrate your starter. You cannot do anything until you rehydrate it. I have the written instructions, and I sent you a video where I show me doing it over a 3-day process. In 3 days, you will have an active starter. Let me tell you right now, don't be afraid. I want you to think about what is the worst you can mess up. It's just flour and water. You cannot mess this up, but I want to push you to start, because many times we will get information, but we're like, I don't know, I'm afraid. Just do it. Just do it. Yes, but I put it in the refrigerator. Okay, so if it's already active, Laverne, that's okay that it's in the refrigerator. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to show you how to rehydrate a starter today because, again, it's a 3-day process, right? But if you watch the video, I go through and I show you exactly that. So what we're going to do next is let's talk about the starter feeding cycle, okay? No, let's first talk about the process of the sourdough starter. And this is all in your book in terms of the stages. So I'm going to show you some starters and the difference. So this right here is actually, when you see the video where I rehydrated, this is the starter from that video. So it is almost active. I don't know if you can see, but you can see it has very few bubbles. It's not as active as the one I'm about to show you. If you look kind of on the inside, you can see there's not many bubbles. So this is not active yet. But let me show you what it looks like when it's active. Can you see the difference? There are bubbles in here. There's bubbles. If you can see the top of it. And this starter was right here, and now it's risen to right here. Okay, they said it's blurry. Okay, let's see if we can get a better shot. Can you see it now with those bubbles? Yes. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is what we're going to use to bake with. Let's talk about what happens with an active starter and the stages, okay? It's going to go through 3 things. You're going to feed it. Well, first you're going to discard, and we're going to get to that. But when you feed your starter, it's going to start off similar to this, except this one is already through the process. It's going to start off, let's just say, about right here. It is going to grow, and it's going to become what we call active, which is this stage right here. Now, let's talk about how long this takes. The more mature your starter is, and the more that you feed it, the quicker it is going to become active. You will get a chance, because when you start baking, you will get a chance to know your starter and how it performs, okay? My starter that I have now, it becomes active in like 4 hours. When I first started, it was taking 8 to 12 hours, then 6 to 8. Now I can have it active in about 4 hours. Why? Because I've been doing it for 3.5 years, and I bake every single week, and I know how to do it. Now, when you first start off and the starter that you activate, it's not going to get active that fast. So you have to plan accordingly and know that it's still going to work. Now, one of the tricks that you want to do is when you're first starting out, because you're going to think it's not growing, it's not doing anything, it's just sitting there. And a lot of times, if you do it before you go to bed, it's been risen and fall before you even get up in the morning. So what I want you to do is you can get a rubber band and put it around your jar to mark before you feed it. I used to do this in the beginning. I don't do it anymore because I don't have to do it anymore. But when you're starting out, get you a rubber band or get a black Sharpie. And when you start it, just make a mark. And then just sit it on your counter and just let it be. On average, it's probably, if I had to guess, depending on the temperature of your house, I would say anywhere between 6 to 12 hours. It may take 12, but you should start to see activity. It's going to rise. It should double in size. Okay, that's number one. It should double in size. Next, you should see bubbles, just like we showed here. You should see bubbles all throughout. And then when you smell it, it smells just like yogurt. Like I don't even know. It just smells like fresh dough, yogurt. Like there's no off-putting smell. It doesn't smell sweet. It just smells like a mild yogurt bread taste. That's how you know it is ready. But let me give you one other tip. There is something you can do called the float test. So let's do that right now. So I just have a jar, a little jar. I'm going to pour some water in it. This is the active starter that I just showed you. And I'm going to take a little bit of this starter and I'm going to plop it in this water. If it'll plop. That is called the float test. Let me get some more so that you can see. And again, you can see the texture of this active sourdough starter. It is like stringy. I'm just trying not to touch it so I don't have to wash my hands right off the bat. There we go. Let's help it. Okay. Do you see that is floating? When it floats, that means your sourdough starter is ready. Now, I don't do this test anymore, but I did do it in the beginning because, again, I'm like, I don't know. Is it going to float? Is it going to not? Is it ready? So I'm giving you some tips to, again, boost your confidence. Now, what happens if it doesn't float? It means it's not as active yet, right? But that is a good way to tell. Now, let me see if I can. We'll test this other one that I don't think is as active yet. And let's see if we can see a difference. So let me just pour this out. We'll get some more water. And let me get a different spoon so it doesn't have the active starter on it. Okay, well, it is more active than I thought. But you can see that it's not, let's see if we can get a good shot. So you can see, okay, it's not floating as much. Can y'all see that? I'm waiting for somebody to say yes or no. You can see that it's not floating as much. Yes, okay, so that means it's not as active, okay? So what would I want to do if I wanted to bake with this? I would just let it get more active. Now, if I bake with this right now, what would happen? Would I have bread? Yes, I would have bread. It's just going to take either longer to rise or it's not going to rise as much. The reason why I'm telling you that is that you cannot mess this up. You can, but you're not going to. It's just not going to rise as fast or it's not going to rise as much. But this is the active starter. And then this one just needs more time. Why? Because this is the one that we just activated this week. This one has been active and being used for years. So I'm going to pour this out. Okay. So the phases of sourdough starter, when you feed it, it is going to grow. It is going to multiply. All of those organisms in there are multiplying. It should at least double. You should have bubbles and it should have a sweet smell, like plain yogurt, plain bread, something like that. That's how you know it's active. If you're still concerned, you're going to do the float test. Is that part clicking so far about how to know when your starter is active? And remember, it can take anywhere from 8 to 12 hours, depending on how often you feed your starter and what process you're coming from. Okay? Okay, yes. Okay, all of that makes sense. And remember, you can mark your jar to see how far it's risen. So the other thing that's going to happen, once it rises and becomes active, it's going to get to what we call the peak. When it's at the peak, it's going to be almost like rounded on the top. Now, again, that rounded part, I didn't know any of that in the last 2.5 years, and I've been able to bake bread. So I'm telling you stuff just to give you extra stuff, but it doesn't matter. If you have bubbles and if it's doubled and it smells good, use it. But it will have it's hard for me to show you the roundedness of it, but it'll have like a rounded dome when it's at its peak. Ideally, you want to bake when it's at its peak. Ideally. After it reaches its peak, then it's going to start to deflate and come down. So what's going to happen is if I leave this on the counter, and let's say I'm not baking with it, if I come back in, let's say 3 to 4 hours, where it is right here now, it's going to be right here. It's going to be right there. It's going to deflate. That is the natural process, right? You discard, you feed, it rises, it comes down. When it comes down, it is no longer active. You will see tiny, tiny, tiny little bubbles, very tiny, versus these are more big. That just means it's time for you to feed it again. That's all it means. That is what it's supposed to do. Okay? Any questions on this step right here? The next step is we're going to actually go here and make a loaf of bread. Any questions on this next step? I mean, excuse me, on this step right here, on just the feeding. After we do the bread recipe, we're going to talk about how to discard and how to feed and what that means. Okay, I see, got it. Does a starter ever die? Great question, Charlene. Yes, a starter can die, but I'm gonna tell you, it's real hard, like real hard to kill it. I've never killed one. I've never known of anybody killing one. And here's the reason why. It's almost like its own natural preservative, right? This is natural wild yeast. And so it's preserving itself. It has like a self-preservation method. So it's hard for you to kill it. Now, what will happen is if you leave it in your fridge and you forget about it, it is going to develop a liquid on top. And matter of fact, I have some in the refrigerator that I can show you what it looks like. It has a brown liquid on the top and it's called hooch. So it's going to look bad. I'll tell you that right now. It's going to look bad. And when you smell it, it's going to smell more like acid, like maybe nail polish remover or something like that. Your starter is still good. You can do one or two things. You can take the hooch, the brown liquid off the top and discard it, or you can mix it in. If you mix it in, your bread is going to be more sour. If not, if you don't want to mix it in, then take it off the top, feed your starter as normal. And because you have not fed it in a while, then I would say feed it, and then every 12 hours, feed it until it gets back normal. And that usually only takes a day or two. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay. You said, if we leave it out too long, do we start over? I mean, if we get the deflate. Okay, great question. So if Tanya, if you're saying if you leave it out, so let's say I was going to make bread now, something happened, I didn't get a chance to make bread. I come back 3 or 4 hours later and it's deflated, but I still want to make bread. I'm going to have to discard and feed it again in order for me to make bread. Let's say I come back tonight, I'm like, you know what? Forget it. I don't want to make bread. I'll do that Tuesday. Then what I can do is, again, I can put it straight in the refrigerator, or I can discard, feed it, put it in the refrigerator, whichever one you want to do. So if you're going to bake bread again, that's our timer going off. Perfect. We're right on time. So if you want to bake bread again, then yes, go ahead and discard and feed. If you want to make bread later, discard, feed, and put it in the refrigerator. Okay, so now we're going to go here and we're going to make bread. I got everything set up, and we are making the honey wheat sourdough sandwich bread, and it's on page, I wrote it down, page 32 in the digital guide. So I'm using the exact same recipe. We're making the honey wheat sourdough sandwich bread. Okay, so let me get to where you can see every step. Now, I also sent out a list of things that you need to get started. One, you got to have a clean jar to do your sourdough in. You must have a digital scale. Like that, you have to have a digital scale. Now, when it comes to sourdough, it's going to be in grams most of the time. A lot of recipes will give you grams and cups. I'm going to tell you, do grams. Get used to using your digital scale because it is exact. What you think, and when you eyeball and say, oh, yeah, that's about a teaspoon, it's not a teaspoon. So get in the process of using your digital scale. Let's grab the active starter. That's the one thing I didn't. Okay, so if you're on your computer, I'm going straight by the recipe, so I want you to be able to see this. So the very first thing it says is to feed the starter and stir to combine. I've already done that. I fed the starter hours ago before we even started the class so that it would be active for this step. So now we're on step 2. To a large mixing bowl, we're going to add half a cup of active starter, which is 100 grams. So I have my scale here, and I'm going to put my bowl on the scale. I'll try to see. I don't know if you guys will be able to see I'm going to turn it on. Make sure that it's on grams, okay? And then when I say tear it out, that just means bring it back to 0. So we're going to put in 100 grams of active sourdough starter. So I'm just going to Pour this in. That's 81. Now, if for some reason I get 115, okay, that's 102. Okay, so we're not right at 100. Great example. Now, don't be like, oh my goodness, I messed up. I can't make this bread. Yes, you can, right? Now, if I want to be particular, I can try to get 2 grams out. I'm not going to try to get 2 grams out, just one because for the sake of time, and one is not going to matter. Now, when I say exact, meaning I wouldn't want to use a cup measurement. I want to use grams because it goes by the volume, right? But 102 versus 100 is not going to make a big difference. If I did 150 grams of sourdough, that would still be okay, but it's going to be more sour. So just know that, okay? So 100 grams of active sourdough starter. Then we're going to add our water, which is 325 grams. I have water right here. Always remember to tear it back out and bring it back to 0. So 325 grams of water. I always try to use filtered water if I can. It just makes it better in terms of the process, because if you have real hard water and you're using tap water, and your water is hard, it may affect the rise of your stuff. So 325, 321, 324, 325. Okay, we're right on it. Perfect. Tear it out again. What does it say next? Add honey. So we need 40 grams of honey. So hopefully you guys are following along. So I'm just taking honey and we're going to stop when it gets to 40. It's hard for me to do it from this side. So I'm trying to 38, 41. We'll call it good. Okay, and then 30 grams of olive oil. Are you guys following with me so far? Tear it back out. 30 grams of olive oil. 30. Okay, perfect. And then it says sea salt. Don't forget the salt. Now, that's one thing. If you forget the salt, your bread is not going to taste good. I have done it, and I think 3.5 years, I've forgotten salt twice. That we had to throw out. Okay, it just does not taste good. Okay, so it says to add 10 grams of salt. So let's make sure if this is on 0. 10. Perfect. Okay, and then I always just go back over my recipe. We got the starter, we got the water, the honey, the olive oil, and the salt. Okay, now I'm going to take it off of the digital scale. You don't want to mix it on the digital scale because that's too much weight with all of that jostling and stuff. So I'm just going to mix it with the spatula. You can see it's just liquidy at this point. I'm just going to mix it all in. And y'all just bear with us as we try to get a good shot. Okay, y'all can see that? That bowl is heavy. Okay, so I'm just mixing it in. So then next it says to add the bread flour and the whole wheat flour, okay? So in this recipe, this is a honey wheat sourdough sandwich bread. If you don't like the wheat and you want lighter, you can change the ratios of this. But if you add up the grams, we're going to use 125 grams of whole wheat flour, 375 grams of bread flour. That's a total of 500 grams. This you can play with. Maybe you want to do 75 grams of wheat flour and 425 grams of bread flour. That's perfectly fine as long as you have 500 grams of flour. If you want, a softer loaf with less wheat. But let's do the recipe exactly as it says. 125 grams of whole wheat flour. So we're going to go back to our scale. I have whole wheat flour here. Make sure this is on 0. Let's take our spatula out. And 125 grams. Now, has anything I've done been hard yet? We're at 108. All right, perfect. Now we need 300. Make sure that's on 0. Then we need 325 grams of bread flour. No, 375 grams of bread flour. Okay. Nope, just need more time in the day. Yep. Okay. And Aaron, I'm going to talk to you about how to make this work when it comes to your life, your schedule. So let's do 375 , 375 grams. 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 3 I got this small scoop. I normally have a big scoop. So that's why I'm going fast, because I know. So 375. We're at 306, 330, 371. All right, perfect. Okay, so now we're going to get our spatula back and we're going to mix this up. And I'm going to show you the consistency because I want you to know what yours should be looking like. Don't email me telling me yours didn't look like this if you do the exact same thing that I'm doing. If I say, okay, how many grams? You're like, well, I put a couple of cups in there. No. You got to do the exact same thing that I'm doing. So as I'm stirring, I want you to see what the consistency is like. It's going to be what we call shaggy. It's very shaggy. Okay, my husband's telling me to hold it differently, but I'm afraid I'm going to drop it. So that's why I'm trying to be careful, because this is my nice heirloom bread bowl. Okay, so it's going to be shaggy. Hopefully you can see what that looks like. Okay, Javon, you said you follow me and feeling good? Awesome. Oh, girl, we can do this. We can do this. Okay, so it's going to be shaggy. Now, some recipes will say to start with a spatula and then get in there and mix it with your hands. You can do that. I'm not going to do that just for the sake of time and me having no, because this stuff gets sticky, y'all. So it's going to be sticky. This step is supposed to be sticky. You're still on the right track, okay? So we're going to, basically all you're trying to do is make sure the flour is incorporated in. So when you get in there with your hands, that's all you're trying to do. Okay, so now what does the directions say? It says to cover the bowl and let the dough rest for 1 hour. That's exactly what we're going to do. And I'm going to cover it with a damp tea towel. This has already been damp because what I was planning for y'all, right? So this, I'm just going to sit on the counter. The damp tea towel just helps the bread to stay moist and not get that hard crust on top. You can use a plastic wrap and spray it with oil. You can use many things. So if you don't have a tea towel, it's okay. Just use some saran wrap. It's okay. So that's in an hour. So hopefully we're going to show you this before class ends and show you the second step, because the second step, I want to make sure that you see it visually so that when you're in your kitchen, you know how to do it. So we're going to put this back over here. Now, let's go ahead and also make, okay, does it make a difference what type of bowl you use, glass, plastic, or ceramic? No, I don't think so. Does glass versus metal matter? You know what? I wouldn't think so at all. Maybe the metal may interact with it. I always just use stainless steel, or that's like a porcelain ceramic bowl. But the other bowl that I'm about to use is like a more of a plastic bowl. So no, I guess it doesn't matter. I probably wouldn't use metal just because metal sometimes interacts with whatever you're baking. But yeah, good question. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over here and we're going to make our sourdough discard butter crackers. That recipe is on page 54. Y'all, these crackers are so good. So good. We made them the other night. We were popping them like they were candy. So I'm showing you an active starter recipe and a discard recipe. So Aaron, going back to your question, because you asked me, well, if it deflated, do I have to start all over? Yes, you can. Or you can also make something with the discard that's not active starter. Now, I'm going to explain what discard is and why you do it after we get this recipe started. But the discard, again, you're going to see this recipe is going to come together very quickly. So we're going to go over here now to this side. Let's see. Oh, yeah, here we go, right here. Okay, so let me get that recipe, but also let me set my timer for, we're going to do 45 minutes instead of an hour. So that way, if I'm in the middle of something, I still got some time to play with. Okay, so that is for the sandwich bread. Now we're going to make the crackers. So page 54, this is the sourdough butter crackers. I gave you 2 cracker recipes. We're going to do the ones that are butter. So these are almost like y'all know club crackers that come in the green box. That's what this is. So good. So we're going to take discard. So I'm going to use the starter that I showed you that was not as active, right? Because starter that's not active is essentially discard. So it says we need 200 grams. So let me grab my scale again. And we're going to put this on the bowl, on the scale. And we need 200 grams. So we're going to turn it on. We're going to make sure it's on grams. And we're going to do 200 grams. And we're going to... So that's 130. But don't worry, I got 2 jars of the same thing. So remember, it doesn't matter about this being active at all. Why? Because we don't need it to rise. Remember, okay, that's it right there. 200 is right there. Remember, the purpose of an active starter is to give you the rise or the leavening agents. So we have 200 grams of sourdough starter. Now we need 180 grams of flour. And it says you may need 20 grams more if the dough is too sticky. So let's start with 180 grams of flour. And for this, we're going to actually use, I'm going to use all-purpose flour. So we're going to use 180 grams of all-purpose flour. Okay, perfect. And so then it says we need 8 tablespoons of butter melted. I already did that step. So we're just going to pour that in there. And again, you can adapt this. If you're plant-based, you can use plant-based butter. Like, it doesn't matter. In any recipe that I have in there that calls for milk, eggs, you can use whatever plant-based option you want. I've used them all. It all works. Okay, and then see, talking, I almost forgot. We need 5 grams of sea salt. So let's get our salt because we want the crackers to actually taste good. 4, 5, perfect. Now, that was how many ingredients? Y'all, that was 4 ingredients. Sourdough discard, flour, butter, and salt. The next time you're in the grocery store, I want you to go to the cracker aisle and I want you to look on the back of Club crackers. Tell me if it has more than 4 ingredients. I haven't even seen it, and I can tell you, yes, it does. This, y'all, you can make this for your family lickety split. So all we're going to do, it says to use a spatula to stir until the ingredients are combined. All we're doing, y'all, is reading and following directions. So we're going to stir this. Uh-oh, that happens. Stir this up. I'm going to show you what the consistency looks like. So you can see kind of what it looks like. It's a little bit crumbly. Now, because I've been making bread, I'm getting in here with my hands because I know it needs to be, the flour needs to be all incorporated. You can see where it's not incorporated. I'm going to incorporate it with my hands. So if you see those little bits of flour, just get in there with your hands and incorporate the whole thing. And now, obviously, when you melt your butter, let your butter cool off a little bit. Don't pour it in there piping hot. Why? Because it's going to be hard for you to deal with your dough. Okay, do y'all see this? This is really just coming into shape like a ball. Just like that. Now, what does it say to do next? It says the dough should be soft and pliable. It should not stick to your fingers. And essentially, it's not sticking to me. That's where I just had my hands in it. It's not sticking. If it's too sticky, add 20 more grams of flour. So cover the bowl and let it rest for 20 to 30 minutes for the flour to absorb the liquid. So that's all we're going to do. We're going to cover it. I have another towel right here. That's it. So I'm going to wash my hands and we're going to come back and talk about the sourdough starter. Okay. Is the sourdough English muffin recipe in the digital book? Yes, it is, Adrian. It is. And actually, if we have time, I have made up some English muffins, the dough. And so if we have time, I can roll it out and show you how to cut it and all that. Can you scroll up? I think there's a question that I can't see. That is so helpful because I feel like where I mess up is not measuring accurately when I substitute plant-based items. Your recipes are more plant-based friendly. Perfect. Thank you, Javon. Does it matter if we use all-purpose flour versus bread flour? Great question, Tanya. So if you mean in certain recipes, if the recipe calls for whatever the flour is, then you can use it. But here's the general rule of thumb. Bread flour is going to give you a more chewy texture. So when it comes to like what we just made with the sandwich bread, you kind of want the bread flour because you want it to be able to, what's the word? The word escapes me. More structured and to have more of a chew, because that's what traditional bread tastes like. All-purpose flour is going to give you a lighter consistency. So in the example, let's say you're making dinner rolls. I have a dinner roll recipe in the workbook. I don't know if that calls for bread flour or all-purpose flour. On a recipe like that, it's interchangeable. You can do. I think we have some feedback. Okay. So when it comes to all-purpose, dinner rolls, if you use all-purpose flour, it's going to be more fluffy. It's going to be more light. If you use bread flour, it's going to be more of a chew. So that's the general determination. And you can use either one interchangeably when it comes to like a dinner roll recipe. But when it comes to like sandwich bread, I prefer a bread flour, but you can always play around with it. Hopefully that makes sense. Any more questions? So do we feel good about the two recipes that we got percolating? Yes, no, okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Javon. She's giving me like, yes, girl, go. Understood. Okay. So now we've talked about what a starter is. We've talked about how the starter acts. It's going to rise. It's going to get to a peak. It's going to deflate. And then all that. Let's talk about sourdough discard and what it is. Okay. And the cycle that you use for discard. So let's see if I have, okay. Here is my sourdough discard jar. You see that it's labeled sourdough discard. I keep this in my fridge. I label it so that I know what's my starter and what's discard. You can see it's like halfway. I got rid of, this morning it was bubbling over because as I was doing different recipes, prepping for you guys on last night, every time I discarded, I just put it in a jar because I want to be able to show you the discard. Well, I put the discard in there and it became active and it was just doing its own thing, right? So I got rid of some of it. So let's talk about why you discard and do you have to discard? Number one, yes, you have to discard for two reasons. One, if you don't discard and you just keep feeding your sourdough starter, it's going to overflow over your whole house. You're not going to have a jar. You're not going to have a container that's big enough to hold it. Because remember, every time you feed it, it's going to double in size. And so if you don't discard, you're not going to be able to maintain it. That's number one. Number two, when you discard, what you're doing is that you're helping, we'll call this a colony of yeast. You're helping them for new bacteria to come in and be introduced to multiply to make it more active. If you keep using the same sourdough starter and you don't discard, you just keep finding bigger bowls and bigger jars and all that, what happens is the bacteria that's in here is going to become dormant. It's not going to be reactivated when you introduce the new flour and water. So you have to discard. Now, you have two options when you discard. One, and some of y'all going to be like, what? You can throw it away. Now, I know you've been taught don't throw nothing away, but at the end of the day, y'all, it's just flour and it's just water. You can make more, okay? So I'll be honest, I throw away more discard than I use. That's just me and my lifestyle and what I have going on. I don't make as many sourdough discard recipes as I do with bread recipes, but I bake bread every single week. And so it doesn't matter that I throw it because I'm always going to have discard. So if I decide today, oh, I want to make cinnamon rolls for the family tomorrow, it's no problem. Why? Because I have an active starter and I'm probably going to be baking bread and I can just, when I go feed it, I have a discard. Most discard recipes are only going to require you to have like 50 to 100 grams of discard. So you have two options. You can discard and throw it away, just down your sink, or you can put it in a separate jar and keep it in your fridge. The reason why I don't keep as much of mine is because I bake bread so much. So just with me prepping last night, I prepped the sourdough sandwich bread that we just did. Like I already have one that's ready to go in the oven. and I did English muffins. So just from those two recipes, I had discard up to here. So that's why I don't need to keep it. Also, it's only good for a couple of weeks in your fridge. In terms of if you don't want a sour taste. If you don't care about the sour taste, you can keep it indefinitely. So you do have to discard. Here is the cycle, right? So for me, I typically bake every week. I usually start my baking on Saturday night because I have all day Sunday that I can bake and I have more time than I do during the week. So on Saturday night, I keep my starter in the fridge because I don't bake every day. I bake usually once or twice a week. So if you're going to bake infrequently, meaning not every day, once you have an active starter, you can keep it in your refrigerator. Hopefully y'all with me. How much discard did you say to use or get rid of? Okay, Tanya, I'm going to get to that. Aaron says, how much bread do you bake a week? Okay, and Adrian said you use discard for pancakes. Okay, perfect. So how much bread do I bake a week? Usually I bake at a minimum 2 loaves of sandwich bread a week. Every single week, a minimum of 2 sandwich loaves. Usually I break 2 sandwich bread loaves and I bake a recipe of English muffins every week. I don't know if you saw my video about these breakfast sandwiches that I make. My family, like, we fighting in Christ to get those things. Do you understand me? Like, it is like every day, like, how many did you get? How many did you get? So I make them every single week, and it makes about 16 to 18 muffins on one recipe, and we go through them in a week with 3 of us. So I usually do English muffins every week, and I do at least 2 loaves of bread. That's at a minimum. Now, if I got time, I'm in town, I'm feeling fancy, I'll do more. I'll do focaccia for dinner. When we're having pasta, I'll do that. I did cinnamon rolls last week. I've done tortillas when we're having Mexican food. So it all depends. But on a base level, those 2 things. Make you stop going to McDonald's. Yes, it sure will. How much discard did you say to use and get rid of? Okay, I'm going to get to that, Tanya. So on the discard, on the cycle. So going back, let's say it's Saturday night at my house. I'm going to bake for tomorrow. So one of the things with sourdough is this, I hate to say it's a disadvantage. It's something that you have to get used to. It takes time. You're not going to wake up in the morning and say, you know what? I want sandwich bread for dinner tonight. That's not going to happen. Now you can say, I want sourdough sandwich bread for toast in the morning. That can happen, but it takes time if you're using an active starter recipe. So but you become used to it. It's just like if you move somewhere and you used to be 5 minutes away from work, but now you're 15 minutes away from work, you start to adjust. Like, okay, I got to wake up early. I got to do that. You start to adjust. So I have adjusted. So on Saturday night, I take my starter out of the fridge. I discard. So Tanya, to answer your question, I discard half. How I feed is because I'm baking more than one recipe, I normally feed 100 grams flour, 100 grams water. When I did not used to bake as much, I did 50 grams flour and 50 grams of water. So it's equal parts flour, equal parts water. The discard, you're going to discard to where you have, if I'm doing 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water, I'm going to keep 50 grams of discard. If I'm going to feed 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water, I'm going to keep 100 grams of discard. So it's all equal parts. That is the basic beginner way to start. Can the ratios be different? They can. That's more advanced. So to keep it simple, 1, 1, 1. Whatever your discard grams are the same as your flour and your water. Okay? So on Saturday night, I take out my starter out of the fridge. I discard. I either put it in a jar or I throw it down the sink. Okay? So everybody's with me. You pull it out of the fridge, you discard. That's the first thing that you do before you feed. You discard. It either goes in a jar or it goes down the sink. Okay, then I feed, right? So let me show you feeding because what we just used, our sourdough. So let me show you feeding. Let me grab this jar. This is the one that we just used for the sandwich bread, right? So when you finish a recipe, meaning that you've made up your dough, you want to feed your sourdough starter again. Now, I don't have to discard because we just used this making a recipe. Does that make sense? So to feed it, let's see. Again, if you want to be precise, I could discard this to make sure that it's 100 grams in here. I will tell you 99% of the time, I don't do that. And it still works out okay, right? Just because I don't have time, right? But if you wanted to, you could make sure that it was only 100 grams in here. Let's see how much this is. So that's 637 grams. That's with the jar. Because I've been doing this and I've weighed my jars, I know that a quart-sized jar is 430 grams without anything in it, right? So let me show you the way. So if you want to be exact, you know how to do that. So let's get another jar. So basically, I have 200 grams left, right? So it says 637. I know the jar itself is 430. That's how I'm getting 200 grams over. Is everybody with me? I want to make sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 100 grams out of this jar. So I have an empty jar. Uh-oh, let's make sure it's on 0. And I'm going to take 100 grams out of here. You can see the texture. So when yours look like this, you know you're right. And normally I'll just get in here with my hands, but I'm trying to just not have to keep going back and forth to the sink since we're live. Okay, that's 99. That's good enough. Now, I want you to see how much is left. Can you see that? It's going to look like you ain't got hardly nothing left. But technically, this is 100 grams. If I put it back on the scale, 537. Our number before was what, 657? So 537. But an empty quart jar is 430. If you don't believe me, let me show you. Do I have a quart jar I can have? Okay, it's too tall. I can't reach it. But trust me, go put a quart jar on your digital scale. It's 430 grams. So when I put this on here with the starter, it's 537. That means I have 107 grams of starter in here. So roughly 100. Does that make sense? I want to make sure you get this step. Yes? Perfect. Okay. So now I have discarded. Here is my discard. What can I do with this discard? I can put a lid on it. I can add it to my discard and keep it, or it can go down the sink. Either one. For now, we're going to put her over here. But now it's time for me to feed. So remember, this is with the example. If it's Saturday night on my schedule, I've taken it out of the fridge. I have discarded. Now it's time for me to feed. I'm going to feed 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. Okay? I use bread flour. Oh, my bread flour is here. When I told you that I made my first sourdough starter in the beginning, it didn't work. It's because I used all-purpose flour, but I used a bleach. You have to use unbleached. So that was the only thing that made it mess up. So that's why I got it on the second time. But I find that bread flour works better when it comes to sourdough starter because it has a higher protein content. And so I always use bread flour to feed my starter. I'm looking down on the floor because I felt something slippery under my foot. Okay, so we're going to feed 100 grams of flour. $79, $96, $100. Uh-oh. So that's 100 grams of flour. We're going to make it 0 again, and we're going to put in 100 grams of water. Perfect. Now we're going to mix it. This is what a sourdough spatula looks like. It's in your digital guide. You can click on the link. You can go to Amazon and get it. Do you have to have this? You do not. You can use a butter knife. You can use a spoon. You can use a fork. But if you want to get you one of these, I like it better. So I'm just going to take it and I'm going to stir it. I'm gonna scrape down the sides. So that's the part that you can do with the sourdough spatula that you can't do with a fork, is you can scrape down the sides to get it all incorporated really, really good. But I'm just mixing it. Hopefully you can see the texture. It looks like thick pancake batter versus when I had it before and was active, it was all spongy. It had the bubbles, but now I just refed it. So I have two options. If it's Saturday night and I want to bake for tomorrow, the next day, then I'm going to sit this on my counter and I'm going to let it get active. Because I know my starter, I know it's going to take about 3 to 4 hours. The temperature in your house has a big effect on how long it's going to take. If you keep a cool house, it's going to take longer. That's okay, no problem. Tips. You can put the mat that you use to germinate your plants. If not, you can put the oven off, but just the oven light on, or you can put it on top of your refrigerator, warm place that's going to cause it, or you can just sit on the counter and just wait extra time. Either one of those works. So if I'm gonna bake, then I'm gonna let it rise. Once it rises, I'm gonna go through with my recipe like we just did and bake. If I'm not going to bake, I'm gonna put the lid on it and put it back in my refrigerator, which is what I'm about to do now. So I was talking, but how long do you think that step took for me to discard, feed, stir? How long do you think that took? I think my apron's coming off. 2 minutes, less than 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It didn't even take 10 minutes, 5 minutes. You're probably at 2 minutes. 2 minutes. The reason why I bring that up is because people say, it takes a long time. I can't keep up with this. I'm busy. So if I'm not baking, I feed my starter dough once a week. I do that step that you just saw, and I put it right back in the fridge. So I'm on a schedule. If I'm not baking, let's say I'm going to be out of town, I don't feel like baking, we have enough, I'm about to go out of town, I do that step right there once a week. I take it out, I discard, I feed it, I put it back in the fridge, and I'm on about my way. 2 minutes. Now, have there been times when I did not do it every week? Yes. I think the longest I've gone without feeding it is maybe 3 weeks. Maybe. It's the same process. It doesn't matter. You haven't messed it up. It is okay. You do the exact same step. You discard, you feed it, you stir it, and either you're going to let it rise to bake with, or you're going to put it back in your refrigerator. It's just that simple. What questions do you guys have about the discard and that step? Let me know what questions you have. Any questions about the discard and that step? You good? Okay. But something, can I keep it in the fridge? Are you saying that it is? Yes, you can keep it in the fridge all week long until you're ready to bake. And if you're not ready to bake for 2 weeks, again, if you remember, just if you can, just set yourself on a schedule wherever your less busy time is. Like for me, I know Saturday night, okay, I can pull it out, boom, 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 I'm done. If I don't want to bake, no problem. So just get yourself on a schedule. Maybe it's, on Friday night or Monday morning, whatever. Just try to get in the habit of feeding it once a week if you can. Does it matter how much you discard? Yes. At the end of the day, you want to discard half. So there are times when I eyeball it. It's exact, but it doesn't have to be exact, if that makes sense. Let's just say on this one that I just did, I went through the step of showing you 100 grams and we discarded 100. I did that for the purposes of, because I'm doing this class. I don't normally do that. I just discard half and I eyeball it. And then whatever the half is left, I add 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. The bread still turns out right. The only thing that may happen is, again, I may leave more in there. So it may be a little bit more sour, but I know how to control that. So just get in the mindset, if you don't want to measure, discard half. Whatever your thing is, discard half. Like this is the sour, oh, that's a discard. This is the one that we just used to make the crackers. There's only very, very little in here. I don't have to discard because I just used it. But if I was pulling it out of the fridge, then I would just discard half. Great question. So let's talk about starter maintenance. Basically, that means is how often you have to do all this. You decide when you want to bake. Here's what I would say. Get in the mindset of, again, if you want to bake, like I do focaccia bread, when we're having like pasta or lasagna or spaghetti or something like that. If I know that I'm going to have that on Wednesday, then I'm already thinking on Tuesday, I need to pull out my starter. I need to feed it so that I can do the steps that we just showed you. It's going to have to let it rise overnight, and then I'll be ready to bake the next day. So let's talk about the various stages of sourdough baking. This is also in your book. It is very similar to yeast baking. When you make up your recipe, that first part where you're mixing everything together, it is going to go through a process. I think it's called autolyse, something like that. That first step, everything's mixed together, like what that bread is doing now. It's going to go through that step. Then it's going to tell you, usually in 30 minutes to an hour, it's going to tell you to go to the next step, which is now incorporated, and it's going to tell you to either stretch and fold, make it into a ball, stir it up one more time, create tension. It's going to say one of those things. That's going to be step 2. After that step, it's going to go through bulk rise or bulk fermentation. That step number 3, can take anywhere from 10 to 12 hours. That's overnight. So let me go back. Let's go back to my example on Saturday night. Let's say I pull out my starter at 6, right? I feed it. I know for my starter, it takes 3 to 4 hours for it to be active. That means at 10 p.m., I have an active starter. That means I'm going to make up my bread the same way we did over here, right? It's percolating. I've mixed all the ingredients. I'm waiting an hour. So now it's 11 p.m. When we get to the 11 p.m., I'm going to do the step that we're going to show you. How much time do we have on that? I think we have 10 more minutes so we can do the next step. I'm going to show you. We're going to do that next step, and then I'm done for 10 to 12 hours. So that's why a lot of people will do sourdough at night, because that long step, the 10 to 12 hours, is going to be done while you're sleeping. So I do that second step at 11 p.m., and then it's going to bulk rise or bulk ferment over 10 or 12 hours. So let's say I do it at 11. I wake up, let's say it's 8 o'clock. 12 hours would be what, 11 the next day? So I wake up at 8 o'clock, I do breakfast, I do all the things. It's now 11 o'clock, and I want to bake my bread. I'm going to look at it. It's going to be all risen. The next step on any bread recipe is going to be the shaping. So if you're making bread, it's going to be the shaping into a log. If you're making English muffins, it's going to be making the circles. If you're making, let's see, the pizza crust, it's going to be rolling it out. Whatever the recipe is, the third step is going to be you actually putting it in the shape of whatever you're making. Does that make sense? What if you're doing a lot of baking? Do you let your starter get bigger? Okay, I'm going to come back and address that. Okay, it's making sense. So remember the stages. I mix all the stuff together. That's step 1. After an hour, usually 30 minutes to an hour, whatever your recipe says, then I'm going to mix it again, get it into a ball, whatever the recipe says. Then I'm going to let it rest, ferment, rise for 10 to 12 hours. That's bulk fermentation. That's usually done overnight. I get up in the morning and I shape it into wherever it's going. Then after that, there's usually another hour, and then you're ready to bake. Now, do you have to do that at night? You do not. Okay, so let's say you decide at 8 o'clock in the morning, you know what? I want sourdough. You can start that step at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it'll bulk ferment all day long, right? So you started at 8, you do the second step at 9, and so now from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., it is bulk fermenting. It's 9 p.m., but let's say you want to go to bed. You don't want to put the bread in the oven. What you can do is you can take your dough that has been bulk risen and put it in the fridge. It will slow down the fermentation process. When you get up in the morning, you would then go to step 4, which is the shaping part. Does that make sense? So let me go back and address your question. What if you're doing a lot of baking? Do you let your starter get bigger? So to answer your question, if you want to do a lot of baking, you would feed your starter more grams. So remember I said when I only used to bake a sandwich loaf a week, I would feed my starter 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. Now, why did I do that? Because just simple math, that's going to give me 100 grams, right? 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of flour. When it's active, I'm going to have 100 grams of active starter. Most recipes, when you're baking bread, is going to call for like 75 to 100 grams. So I'm good. Now I feed 100 grams of starter and 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. That gives me 200 grams. So I can do 2 recipes. If I wanted to do more than that, then I would just feed it more. So whatever amount of flour you feed it, the same amount of water. So equal parts. Does that answer your question? And you can do it before work and then let it bulk rise and the rest when you get home. Yes, you can. Absolutely. So if you work outside of your home, let's say you mix it up in the morning and you're still at home to be able to do that second step, then you do the second step, you're out the door at 8, you come back at 8, it may be ready to go, and then you shape it. But remember, once you shape it, there's still another hour involved, right? So then you can bake the focaccia, bake the dinner rolls, whatever it is you want to do. You're usually gone 11 to 12 hours a day. Yep, so you can do it in the morning. Perfect. Okay? All right, so I think it's time for us to check our bread. And before we do that, I want to show you, because this is the one that I started on last night, right? So you can see when you get to this step, we're not going to get to this step today because I already pre-did it, right? This is what it should look like in your loaf pan. It should rise above your loaf pan. We're going to go ahead and put this in the oven, and hopefully it'll be done. It will be done by the time class is over. So now, do I ever use a Pullman loaf pan, the one with the lid that makes it more of a square bread? No, I have not. Sorry. I have not. I don't have one, but I want to get one. Now let's go to step 2. I'm going to bring this over here. This has been about, I think, 50 minutes. This is the sandwich loaf bread that we did. No, that's not that. That's English muffins. I was like, no, it shouldn't look like that. It's risen. Those are the English muffins. If we have time, I'll show you that. Those are English muffins. But see, I knew it wasn't right because I'm like, no, it shouldn't be risen. Okay, this is the sandwich bread that we made. You can see that. That's the one that we just did. Okay, it's been about 50 minutes to an hour. Remember, the recipe said to wait an hour. Let's find the recipe. Okay, so it says, remember, we're on step 2, cover the bowl and let the dough rest for an hour. So we've done that. It's probably been about 50 minutes. So we're like 10 minutes shy, but it's going to be okay. Most of them are 45 minutes to an hour. Then it says, wet your hand with water and stretch and fold the dough until it tightens and starts to form a ball. So let me wet my hands. And that's only so that it doesn't stick as much. You can flour your hands, wet your hands. I don't normally wet my hands, but because I know some of you are following right along, I want to do exactly what it says. I don't want you to have any excuse. Okay, so we're gonna have to get a good shot of this, right? As we stretch and fold. So let me explain it before I do it. The goal here is that we're going to create tension and to put it into a ball. Remember, there's gluten in here, and so we want to tighten it. It's going to give the bread structure. Okay, so when I say stretch and fold, I'm going to lift the dough up and over, and then I'm going to turn my bowl and do the exact same thing until I complete pretty much a whole rotation or a whole revolution. Okay, so I'm trying to see if my husband can get a good shot as I do this. Okay, all right. Somebody says is recipe bread machine friendly. You know what? I don't know because I don't have a bread machine anymore. I got rid of mine. I don't know. So I'm lifting it up and folding it over, and I'm turning it this way. So I'm lifting it, folding it over. I'm just doing a quarter turn so I can get every edge. I'm lifting it and I'm turning. I'm lifting, turning. I'm showing you this for demonstration. It obviously doesn't go this slow. So I'm lifting it and turning. And I'm just going to keep doing this and turning the bowl around. So I'm just turning it with this hand. And it's going to form a ball. You can see it's already starting to form a ball. So I'm just lifting. You cannot mess it up. Don't get afraid. Just lift and fold down. Lift and fold down. There's also a picture in your book. So it's becoming a ball. You can see it's already smoother than it was before. It was shaggy before. So lift, and it's almost getting to the point where I can't even lift it and turn it anymore because it's already in the ball shape, right? There's not much for me to lift and to turn. It's a ball. Can everybody see that? It's just like this. Okay. Javon says yes. Okay. So then I'm just going to cover it with the damp towel. This is the step. If you were doing it at night, you could go ahead and go to bed because it's going to take 10 to 12 hours for it to rise. So when you do this for the first time and you're going back and you're watching this video, you go to bed. When you get up in the morning, it should be risen. It should be at least double in size. It's going to be risen. Then the only step that I'm not showing you is the shaping step because I've already shaped it. It was hard for me to get it at every stage. So I tried to show you the most critical stages that I feel like you would have questions on. The first step was the mixing, so you can see the texture. And then this step was getting it ready for bulk rise. So when you wake up in the morning or 10 or 12 hours later, it's going to be risen. You're going to take it out, put it on a floured surface, and then you're going to make it into a rectangle, just like the directions say. And then you're going to roll it into a log and put it in your loaf pan. You're going to put it in the loaf pan, like I just showed you, and let it rise. And then you're going to put it in the oven. I'm going to wash my hands. You guys put your questions in the thing if you have questions about what I just did. Let's see. Did you know the lid on the discard? Did I screw the lid on the discard before you put it in the refrigerator? No, I did not. You don't want to ever screw your lid on. You just want to place it on there. The reason why is because you want to be able to let air escape. So never screw your lid on for your sourdough starter. Okay, so this is ready to go in 10 to 12 hours. I'm going to put this back over here. I see a question. I'm going to come back and answer your question. And the reason why I'm putting my recipes on top of the bowl is because I got so many bowls and I'm going to get confused about what's what. So this is going back over here. My husband's going to get the benefit of having 2 loaves of bread for that right there. And then the question is, did I hear correctly about using a germination mat to help indoor temperature? Yes. I don't know if my husband can show you, but just like this. That's what I had the starters on. Yep. Okay, now are we ready to go on? We got to finish our crackers. Are we ready for that? If you put bread in fridge at this point, do you have to let it get back to room temperature and start the rise over? Good question. So on the bread that we just did, I would not put it in the refrigerator. Let it rise through the bulk fermentation process overnight or the 10 to 12 hours. I would not put it in the fridge at this point. Now you can, but it's going to take much, much longer. But remember, the fridge is to help slow the fermentation down. At this point, it's not even fermenting yet. It's about to start. So let this part be on the counter for 10 to 12 hours. After that, once you get the 50% where it's doubled in size, then if you don't have time to deal with it, then you can put it in the refrigerator. Okay? Does the bulk rise happen in the refrigerator or on the counter? It happens on the counter. On the counter for the bulk rise. Okay? So let's get back to making our crackers. Y'all, which one were the crackers? Okay, these are the crackers right here. Let's see if we can get these crackers. So English muffins there, bread's there. Here are the crackers. Let's go back to the cracker recipe. We did the first step, and the second step was to cover the bowl and let the dough rest for 20 to 30 minutes. So we've done that. So this is what the dough looks like. If you could feel it, it's like hard. Not hard, but I mean, you can tell it's together, right? Then it says, place the dough between two pieces of parchment paper. Use a rolling pin to roll out the dough. So that's what we're going to do. We have one piece of parchment paper here. We're going to put that right there. That's our cracker mixture. And we're going to use the second piece of parchment paper, rolling pin, right here. Let me grab it. Forgot to get that. Okay. And we're going to roll. Now, again, this is just so that you don't get this sticky. That's all this is for. When I did this before, did I have two pieces of parchment paper? I didn't. I'm showing you this because, again, I'm showing you the way of the recipe because I don't want you to have any hangups about, oh, that's not what she did. I don't know if I can do that. But you'll learn when you get in your own kitchen. And just like you have confidence to cook for your family now, whatever it is that you're good at cooking, you will have confidence with sourdough. So I'm just rolling this out. And to me, it's even harder to do with the parchment paper. But basically, you're just getting this to a thin surface. I want them to be more thin than thick. But it does save you from having to clean your rolling pin. Okay, can y'all see that? Now, you would like it to be a perfect square, but the way I'm turned is kind of hard for me to do it and to show you at the same time. So I'm trying to make sure you can see versus it being, that's our timer. We're right on it. Okay. That is good enough. Okay. So then what does it say next? It says use a knife, I think, to cut it. Yep. Cut the dough into rectangles using a sharp knife, or you can use a bench scraper. Here's what a bench scraper looks like. That's also in your toolkit. Do you have to have it? No, but it makes it a lot easier. This is good for when you get to the step and you got to shape your dough and you want to get it out of the bowl or put it back into your loaf pan. This helps with that. So it is very, very handy. But can you make bread without it? You can, but it's a good tool to have. So we're going to cut this into rectangles using the bench scraper, or you can use a knife. So hopefully you can see what I'm doing. I'm making long strips. And let me get a knife because I think a knife might go quicker. Let me grab a knife. Yep, a knife goes quicker. Okay, so now I did it long way, so now I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to have to stand this way in order for me to do it. So I'm making them into little bitty squares. So the club crackers are long. You could make them long, but we're just going to do squares for the sake of this recipe. Can you see that? Little bitty squares. Then what does the recipe say? To prick it with a fork. I always wonder how they get those little holes in the crackers. This is how, y'all. You just prick it. And this is so the air can escape. So I'm just pricking at least 2 times on each square. There's no science behind it. It don't have to be perfect. It don't have to be pretty. They don't have to be equidistant from each other. Just prick the hole. Just prick, prick, prick. Is this making sense? Do you see how easy this is? And I wish that y'all was here to be able to taste these crackers, but we are going to eat them in your honor, just so you know. In your honor. I think there's only one person on this Zoom that lives close to me, which is Jackie. Jackie may be like, I'm on my way. It's going to be in your honor. 100%. Okay, I think we got them all pricked. Can y'all see that? So now we're just going to transfer this piece of parchment paper over here. Okay, we left that there. Again, it ain't pretty because I'm doing this for TV. But okay, you see how easy that is. Okay, just check our directions again. I'm checking y'all because I've been baking so many things. I just want to make sure I give you the right thing. Okay, so we pricked it a few times with a fork, bake the crackers for 15 to 17 minutes. Make sure they don't brown. So we're going to set the timer for 15 minutes. I'm going to put these in the oven. So we got our bread and we have our crackers. Bread is already looking good. Let me move the bread over. Okay, 15 minutes. Let me set the timer so we don't burn our crackers. And okay, 15 minutes. Okay. So y'all, we've made the crackers, we made the bread, it's in the oven. Let me see what else I didn't talk about. Okay. You love how easy, yeah, y'all, that's easy. So easy. So easy with the discard. And I mean, y'all, it's you can't mess that up. It's so easy. Okay. So let's kind of recap. We have about 25 minutes left. I want to give time for questions. I have gone through everything that I wanted to go over that I think is crucial, but let's kind of just do a recap. I'm going to ask you guys some questions because I want to make sure that it's cementing in your brain. So let's kind of go from the top of where we started. We talked about the difference between sourdough starter and yeast. So who can tell me one thing that is different between sourdough starter and yeast? Tell me in the comments. Great. You received the starter. You're excited to start. Oh, you haven't even received it. Starter start is more natural. Perfect. Yes. Perfect. Okay. I'm just checking for knowledge. It's wild yeast. It's more natural. Okay. Let's also, I want to make sure I mention these things that affect sourdough. One is time. What I mean by that is you got to train yourself that if you want to do sourdough, it takes more time than yeast bread. Now, I do yeast bread and I do sourdough. So I don't just only do sourdough bread. I do more sourdough bread than I do yeast for the most part, but I do yeast bread as well. I do yeast when I want something that day and I'm like, let's get to it, and I need it. Usually I'm doing yeast because of the time. It's much quicker. I think about something or somebody may be coming over. I'm like, ooh, let me make some rolls or, oh, I want tortillas tonight. So I'll do a I'll do a flour yeast tortilla versus a sourdough because I want it for dinner that night. But if I have planned and time is not of the essence, then I do sourdough. It's good to know both. But time is a factor in sourdough. You need to plan 24 hours in advance. Now, that may sound daunting, but I'm telling you, if you just think about it, it just becomes natural. Or get yourself on a rhythm. Where I would start, I started with a sandwich bread because I think that most people are going to eat toast. You have bread in your house. If you're like my husband, when he eats yeast bread, it definitely has an effect on his body. When he does sourdough, he has no issues, none whatsoever. So to me, the sandwich bread is an easy thing to do that I think most people's families will eat, right? So I would start there. But think about what your family likes to eat. Do you make pizzas at night? On every Thursday night, then you could do a sourdough pizza crust. So many different things. But time is going to affect your sourdough. Also, the temperature in your house. The warmer it is, the quicker it's going to rise. Sourdough likes between 70 to 72. If you keep your house at 68, that's fine. Just know it's going to take a little bit longer unless you do one of the tips that I gave you. It's no problem. I'm not saying to change the temperature in your house, but just know it does affect it. But that's the same thing with yeast bread, right? Also, the other thing that affects sourdough is the type of flour that you use. So in my sourdough journey, I've only used whole wheat, all-purpose, and bread. I have not done anything with rye. I have not done anything with spelt, just because I haven't. There's not really a more reason than that. I don't personally like rye bread, so I don't know that I would ever make it. Spelt bread is a little bit more advanced. I probably will try it one day, but I just haven't. But those types of breads, the rye and the spelt, is more advanced, and it's going to be more difficult to work with. Not impossible. It's a different texture, and your bread is going to act differently. Which brings me to my next thing that affects sourdough is hydration or moisture. This is in your book. This is, again, you don't need to know this to bake bread, but as you keep doing sourdough, you will hear this. So I want to make sure that I mention it. When it comes to hydration, there's a formula in your book for hydration. It's the amount of water divided by the amount of flour in the recipe. I think I have that right. I may have it the other way around. Yeah, I think it's the amount of flour divided by the amount of water divided by the amount of flour. That equals your hydration. The hydration on this sandwich bread that I just gave you is 65% hydration. What does that mean? Lower hydration is going to be easier to work with, meaning the texture is going to be not as stiff, right? It's going to be easier for you to handle. It also, when it's a lower hydration, it makes your bread more structured, like a sandwich bread is structured, like it has a shape. When you get to higher hydration loaves, like rye and spelt, the dough is going to be way more stiff. So much so stiff that you may have to use a mixer. Doesn't mean that you can't, doesn't mean it's impossible, but it does react differently because of the protein and the gluten content, okay? So flour does make a difference. If you are a beginner, I would stay in the lane of bread flour and all-purpose flour. Why? Because I'm just trying to give you confidence. Once you know how to do the basics, go out and just do all the things. But don't do all the things over here and you haven't mastered the simple, because you'll get frustrated and discouraged. Stay in the lane of bread flour and all-purpose flour. There are, I don't do gluten-free sourdough. I don't know how to do that as of yet. There is a person on Instagram that does it. I don't know her. I've never tried her stuff, but she talks about it a lot, and I can give you her name as a resource if you want to try that out. Is it affected by the humidity in your area as well? Yes. So the humidity, the temperature in your house, the moisture, all of that plays a part, but mostly the temperature. Like the temperature in your house is going to be the big factor. And again, the temperature is going to affect how humid it is in your house. Can you use different flours each week as you feed the starter? For example, I have a whole wheat bread flour starter, but I want to make white bread. Can I use white bread flour to feed it this week? I've never done that, Tanya, and everything that I've read says you should have two different ones. So to be honest, I've never done it because I just use the same starter and I always have bread flour in mine. When I have used something different, like if I wanted to activate my starter like quickly, like mine is now 4 hours. If I wanted to get in like 2 hours, I would use a dark rye flour to feed it because the content in the dark rye activates it really, really quickly, right? But if I'm using that starter, I would keep it separate when I'm making like more of a rye bread. So my best advice would be is to keep it separate. If you want to have a whole wheat flour, starter to make whole wheat bread, then I would keep it as such. If you're saying you have a whole wheat flour starter now and you want to add all-purpose flour to it, you can, but I don't know how that would interact. Good questions. Okay, so we've talked about the starter, how it's different. We've talked about the factors that affect the starter. We've talked about the stages of the starter. So let's go back and refresh on the stages of the starter. What is the first step? When you pull your starter out of the fridge, what is the first thing you need to do? Put it in the comments. If you have it in the fridge, what's the first thing you need to do? Discard. That's right. I missed the question. Can you make it without bread flour? Go back, see if you can scroll it down, honey. Can you make without bread flour just using einkorn whole wheat and einkorn all-purpose flour? Amanda, that I don't know because I haven't done it. I would assume that you can, but because I haven't done it, I don't know what the results are going to be. Now, if you're using the starter that I sent you, I would not do that with that starter. I would make it traditionally and then make you a separate starter, and you can try it with the einkorn whole wheat and all-purpose and things like that. I know that the einkorn whole wheat flour, it is going to behave differently. It has a different protein content, so it's going to be more stiff, right? So, but I don't have any experience with the einkorn when it comes to the sourdough. I apologize for that. Okay, discard. To begin a sourdough starter, is it truly just flour and water? Yes, it is. Absolutely. That's all it is. So, Javon, to your question. So, let me talk about that because I didn't talk about that. So what I sent you was a dehydrated starter, meaning it was a starter that I have that was active. I dehydrated it, right? And I had in your book, I tell you how to dehydrate your starter. Once you have an active starter, I do recommend that you dehydrate it, dry it, get it to a state to where it's dry or whatever method you want to use. Why? So that you have a backup. Because if you have little kids, you got your starter on the counter, and they come by, mommy, and they swipe your jar, and it all spilled on the floor. I don't want you to hurt your child. I want you to have a backup so you can like, that's okay. That's okay. Mommy has another one, right? So there is a section in your guide that tells you how to dehydrate. There is also a section that tells you how to create a starter. So if you want to create your own starter, you can do that. And yes, it is just flour and water, and it usually takes about 6 to 7 days. I give you the exact steps. It's the exact same thing that I did to create my starter. And so if you want to play around with it, I would encourage you to do that. I've given you one, but if you want to create your own, by all means do that so that you know that you can and that you have it. Can you freeze dry a starter? Yes, you can. You can freeze dry the starter as well as dehydrate it and all of that. And that's also in the book. Your daughter is side-eyeing you because she's going to be the one that's going to knock your stuff off. Look, don't hurt your kids, okay? It's just flour and water, folks. It is just flour and water. Desiree, I'm funny. That's what people tell me. Okay. So we've talked about that. So the first thing we're going to do when we get it out of the fridge is to discard. Then we're going to feed it. Now, what stages does it go through once we feed it? It's going to do what? When we feed it, what is going to happen? It's going to double. That's right. It's going to grow. When do you incorporate herbs? I'm not sure I understand your question. Type more in there, John Doe. I'm not sure I understand your question about the herbs. It's going to double. It's going to expand. That's right. Okay, so once it doubles and it expands, it's going to get to a peak. And then after it gets to a peak, what's going to happen after that? Put it in the chat. I'm making sure you guys know what's going on. What happens once it gets to the peak? I don't see any answers. If we don't use it immediately, it will fall. It falls, flatten. Yep, it declines. It falls. So that's normal. That's what's supposed to happen. And once it falls and declines, what do you do then? You either put it in the fridge because you're not going to bake, or you're going to refeed it. Right? Okay. The question about the herbs, I'm not sure I understand. So if you can put more in there, then let me know. I'll say, now let's go back and review maintenance. How often, ideally, should you feed your starter? Even if you're not using it, you should feed it at least weekly. That's ideally. If you forget, no worries. Do not throw that starter down the sink. Feed it, discard it, feed it. And again, if you need to do it a couple of more times, like if it's been like a month or so, then feed it, leave it on your counter, and 12 hours, discard and feed again until the texture gets right and the smell gets right. If you have a smell, or how will you know if your starter is bad? I want to address this. If there is mold on it, which I have never seen, you would have to let it go for a long time. But if there's mold on it, or after you refeed, it is not getting better and it smells like it should not be used, then obviously don't use it, throw it away, buy you another one, start you another one. Okay, he was asking about when you were folding the dough, is that when you add herbs if you want to flavor it? Is that for the crackers? Is sourdough a fermented food? Yes, it is. It is a fermented food, but also yeast bread is fermented as well. He was asking about when you were folding the dough, is that when you add the flour if you want to? Oh, if you want to have a herb loaf of bread. You know, I've never done a herbed loaf of bread. I guess you could do a couple of things. Yes, when you are folding it and shaping it, you could sprinkle some herbs in it, and that would be on the inside. So yes, you could do that. Or if you wanted to sprinkle something on the top, you could do that as well. Sprinkle the herbs. So when I do focaccia bread, I do put herbs on the top of that, and I do that at the step before it's time to go in the oven. So I'll do like garlic and rosemary, parsley, thyme, or something like that. Yep. Okay, perfect. Any more questions? We have, let's see how many more minutes. Okay, we have 33 seconds on the crackers. So let me go pull out the crackers and they should be ready. It probably could take 2 or 3 more minutes because I did the 15. It says 15 to 18, but you can see the bottom. Okay, that's my timer going off. Hold on, let me stop that. But you can see the bottoms are good. Looks just like crackers. Now for me, I like my bread always to be brown. So for me, if I didn't have the bread in the oven, I would brown these on the top just because I don't like pale looking crackers like that. That's just me, a personal preference. But they are done. So they're hot. Let me take one. I don't know if you can hear the crunch. It tastes so good. So as they rest and cool off, they're going to crisp up more. So I would wait like 10 or 15 minutes. Then you can break them all apart and you got crackers just like that. So if you're having chili, you're having soup, salad, you want some crackers, there you go. They don't look the best on the camera, but let me tell you, they're good. No, we had no effect from Hurricane Helen at all. None whatsoever. How do you store sourdough bread? Okay, refrigerator counter. Great question. Let me get to that. Y'all, these crackers are good. Let me see if you can see. So good. Okay, so we got how many more minutes on the bread? 5 minutes. How do you store it? So I use a bread bag that I get from Amazon. They're in my Amazon shop. For us, because we eat it pretty regularly, we store it on the counter. But it's only going to last on the counter about 5 days. So if you don't eat bread that fast or your family doesn't, then put it in the refrigerator. Otherwise, you're going to see mold by day 6 or 7. Because remember, it does not have any preservatives. The reason why that bread on the shelf that you buy in Walmart can last is because, again, it has a whole bunch of preservatives. This does not have preservatives. So leave it on the counter if you're going to eat it in I would say 5, 6 days. After that, it's not going to be any good. You'll start to see mold on it, but just put it in your refrigerator if you want to make it last longer than that. I have ours in the refrigerator now just because we had a half of a loaf left and I knew that we weren't going to eat it. And so just to preserve it, I did that. But normally it's gone in our house in 4 to 5 days. Yep. Any more questions? We have 5 more minutes on the bread. I'm going to show you that. While we have a few minutes, let me get the English muffin started so you can see that part. So English muffins, yeah. This is the step where it has already bulk risen overnight. You can see what the dough looks like. Okay. So I'm going to get some flour here to flour my surface. So if you're making English muffins, this is the shaping step. I'm going to pull the dough out. Let me see if I can do it in a way. It's hard for me to do it this way. Okay, I can't do it that way. I'm going to pull the dough out. You can see it's stringy. I get both sides with the flour. And you can hopefully you can see the texture just by me touching it. It's soft, it's pliable. Again, you can use your rolling pin. I just use my hands just because the less dishes I have to wash, the better. I put a little flour on the top just to make it easy for my hands. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to get it to about a 1/2 inch thickness there. And then I take a biscuit cutter, and that's how I make my English muffins. Let me grab my biscuit cutter. I thought I had it over here. You can also buy those egg muffin rings. I don't have any of those. I just use this. I just go around, make the English muffins just like that. And then what you would do at this step, you would have a cookie sheet with some parchment paper. On the parchment paper, you're going to sprinkle some semolina or cornmeal to prevent it from sticking. And then you're going to place these on the cookie sheet, just like that. Then you're going to cover them with a towel and let them rise for an hour. And then you can bake them and you have English muffins. Just that simple. So that made, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. And then I got more here. Will I use this dough? Of course I will. So I'll do that after the class. But that's as simple as it is. You would put this on parchment paper, sprinkle the bottom of the parchment paper with semolina or cornmeal, and then sprinkle the tops of them, let it rise for an hour, and then you can either do it on a griddle or you can just bake them in your oven. I don't remember what the directions say, 375 maybe for 15 or 20 minutes, something like that. But that's as simple as it is once you get to that step. Okay? Okay, I think it's time for our bread to come out. So let's get the bread. We have a minute left, which is still good. This is our bread. Is that not beautiful? Yes. We did it, y'all. Okay, let me find a place to put this. Okay. You can put some butter on the top. It's good to go. You got honey wheat bread for the family, for sandwiches, for toast, for whatever you want to do. Okay, so what questions did I miss? Okay. If you have any final questions, please put them down below. If you want to come in and answer your questions, raise your hand. My husband can unmute your mic. Okay. I don't see any questions. Hold on, scroll down. Is there? Okay, got it. Okay. Fantastic. So just to recap, you should have the digital guide that I showed you. I just printed mine. That's yours. You're going to get a replay of this class by tomorrow evening. It'll come in your email. So if you don't get it, let me know. If you ordered a sourdough starter before Wednesday and you have not gotten it, there are 3 people that I reached out to over a week ago that when you paid for the class, it did not charge you for the starter. There was a mix-up on our system. There was 3 people it impacted. So if you're one of those people that ordered before Wednesday and you don't have a starter, you're probably one of those 3 people. I sent you an email a couple of weeks ago. So just email me. We will get you a starter. If you ordered after Wednesday, your starter will go out in the morning. You should have it by Wednesday or Thursday at the latest, right? Let's do one final shot of our bread. We have our bread here. And we have our crackers. That's in your, y'all, this is in your honor. That's in your honor right there. Okay. How do you cut your bread? Great question. So with the bread, I put it and pop it onto a cooling rack. Let me show you that. I usually do this like 5 minutes after it comes out, because what I find is if I don't, it'll it might be too hot. I usually wait 5 minutes. So I'll pop it on here and let it cool on the wire rack, so that way it kind of maintains its, when I say crispiness, like I don't want it to be super, super soft, like all around on the top. I put it here and then I slice it with a serrated knife. You can get fancy and get one of those electric slicers. I don't have one of those. I just use a serrated knife. Slice it when we want to use it and put it in the bread bag. That's it. Do I typically sell starter? Yes, I sell starter. It's on our website, livingfoodsfarm.com. Go to kitchen items for sale. You can buy a dehydrated starter if you want an extra one. Also, I'm going to start doing live starter. The only reason, and that means you're going to get the liquid version, which means it's going to be ready to go. The only reason I haven't done it yet is because I'm still trying to figure out how it performs when I ship it. And I certainly didn't want to do it in the summertime. But we do have all the stuff ready to sell live starter. I just haven't pulled the trigger yet, just because I think what I'm going to do is going to get a couple of guinea pigs
that I will send it to for free, like maybe 2 or 3 people, and you just tell me if it arrives, you can do it and it works, right? But I want to do that after you have you got your own starter activated. Can you tell us why you named your starter manna? Yes, absolutely, I can. So starters are a living organism. So you will find that everybody who has a sourdough starter, they name it. And so my husband and I were going back and forth with what to name our starter, and we landed on the name manna from the reference in the Bible. The Lord gave the children of Israel manna to feed them. And so the reference is that once you learn this skill, you'll be able to feed your family, and with God's help, you will have bread for years to come. So that's why we named it manna. Any other questions? All right, I want to respect your time. Thank you guys so much. I do not take it for granted that you spent your money, that you spent 2 hours on your Sunday to spend time with me in my kitchen, teaching you a little bit of what I know. I pray that this blesses you and your family, that you're able to make amazing bread, that your husbands and your kids are gonna be like, Mama, what you doing? Daddy, what you doing? You making all this wonderful bread. I hope it blesses you. If you will, please give me feedback on the class. We want to do more of these. Let me know what other classes you want to see. I'll send that out tomorrow when I send the replay. I'll send you a question so that you can give us a review and a feedback on the class. Thank you guys so much. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.